Today we are going to discuss about um, it's, Dalshmi.
Today's session is on management of pain, NSAIDs, and neuropathic pain, sir.
Yeah. So this is very important because we see many types of prescription which with which we usually will not be able to treat neuropathic pain, and there are a prescription which we think it may be useless or pharmacologically not correct. Uh, when somebody prescribed with many medications like uh, 2-NSAID, like there are many faulty prescriptions. So Dr. Mary Abraham, who is palliative care physician from Delhi, will be talking about these topics. Uh, she was an anesthetist. She's an anesthetist, but now she's not practicing anesthesia, but she's practicing palliative care, and she has been associated with us for a few years. Thank you, madam, for being our faculty today, and it's over to you.
Doctor, can you unmute from your end, Dr. Mary Abraham?
Am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you, Sunil. Thank you, Rajalakshmi. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to once again take this class. And I'm sorry, there was an internet issue in my house, and that is why I got delayed in getting on. And now it has been resolved, and I'm so sorry for the delay. Okay, so we'll start off with the presentation. As usual, it is a privilege for me to participate as faculty for Pallium India, and I consider it a great privilege to do so. So I'll be talking about, first slide, on the pain management, and I'll be focusing on WHO step 1 and 2 drugs, and also with an emphasis on adjuvant drugs and the drugs used in neuropathic pain. And first, let us start off with pain. That's so important. So in 2010, at the International Pain Summit of Indian Association of Study of Pain, a declaration Montreal was made in which it was declared that access to pain management is a fundamental human right. So it further elaborated that it's the right of all people, irrespective of which place they belong to, whether it's a developed country, underdeveloped country, east, west, anywhere, but they should have access to adequate assessment and treatment of pain by trained healthcare professionals. So that was a landmark statement that was made about 10 years ago, which emphasized that pain management is a fundamental human right. Next, please. So according to the International Human Rights Law, countries have to provide pain treatment medication as part of their core obligations. It's their clinicians are obliged to provide pain relief, okay, and under the right to health. So, and in case there is a failure to take reasonable steps to prevent the suffering because of pain, that has been deemed cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Those are very strong words, okay, but it is actually deemed cruel if you're not treating pain, whether it is acute pain, whether it's chronic pain, whether it's cancer pain, any kind of pain. Now cancer pain is now a health priority, and WHO has developed policies and strategies to treat it with an emphasis on total pain management. So I think by now you must be aware what is total pain management. That means not just physical pain, but you have to treat the emotional aspects, that is the psychological aspects, the spiritual aspects, and the social aspects. That is total pain management. So you have to have a holistic approach to treat pain, and not just take care of the physical pain. Next, please. So let's come to the WHO analgesic ladder. Next. So this WHO analgesic ladder was devised in 1986, about 35 years ago, and even today in 2020 it is still valid and it is still being followed by palliative care doctors and by pain specialists all over the world. So it has stood this test of time, And this was based on the recommendations of a group of international experts who formulated this. Okay, one of them was Dr. Twycross. So he's a leading person in palliative care, and they only devised this ladder. And after that initial devising the ladder, it has been translated into 22 languages, and it has served as a catalyst to treat cancer pain worldwide. So it has spread all over the globe, this WHO analgesic ladder. Next, please. So it is a very simple tool. It's a well-validated tool, and it is an effective tool. It is basically a stepwise approach to treat cancer pain depending on the severity of pain. Now, before the WHO analgesic ladder, that is before the 80s, there was a lot of hesitation to give drugs like opioid because, first of all, it was difficult to obtain it because of the drug regulations, because it was being misused also. But the other thing was, a person who's either prescribing or taking opioids was treated with stigma. That means you're on drugs, you're an addict, you know, that kind of a thing. So because of that also, physicians hesitated to prescribe it and patients hesitated to take it. Even today, when you write morphine, there are many people who say, but morphine, isn't that a drug for a drug abuse? I mean, will I get addicted to it? Even today, it's prevalent. But can you imagine how it was 35 years ago? But the WHO step ladder, because it was endorsed by the WHO, this legitimized the use of opioids in cancer pain. That means the stigma and the regulations, everything was taken care of because it was endorsed by the WHO. Next, please. But before you apply the ladder to any patient, we need to assess pain because it is based on the severity of pain. So first of all, you need to assess pain. Now, when you assess pain, you must know whether it is a neuropathic pain or a nociceptive pain. Cancer pain can be both. It can be either nociceptive or neuropathic or mixed. But you have to see whether which component is more and which you need to treat. Only then you can apply the ladder. And what is the intensity of pain? So we have various scores like numerical rating score and visual analog score. And even for neuropathic pain, there are various scales to assess the neuropathic pain. So because this is very much basic to applying the ladder, you should know what type of pain it is and what is the severity of pain, right? Next, please. So coming on to the WHO analgesic ladder, it's basically a 3-step ladder. So the step 1 is the non-opioid analgesic along with an adjuvant. And if it is not responding to this, you go to the step 2, which is a weak opioid with a non-opioid adjuvant. And if that's again not responding to this, which means it is very severe pain, you go on to the step 3, which is a strong opioid with a non-opioid and an adjuvant. So you notice that this non-opioid is there at every step of the ladder. Even if your opioids are added on, it is still there. Next, please. And with this ladder, nearly 71 to 76% of cancer patients can get relief of pain, however severe it is. So that means 3/4 of patients can be treated by just applying the WHO analgesic ladder. Next, please. So let us see the salient features of this WHO ladder. The first important feature is the drugs are given by mouth. By mouth means it is given orally. That's a standard route of administration of the WHO drugs. I mean the analgesic ladder drugs. That applies even for the step 3 or the strong opioids. And so how is it advantageous? It is advantageous because it can be given by at home. It can be given by the caregiver. It can be given by even a healthcare worker, not necessarily by a nurse. So it is very easy to administer. So that is the main advantage of the giving by mouth. The second important feature is given by the ladder. Ladder means you start with, when a patient first comes to you, you assess the pain, and depending on that, you start from step 1. And then you gradually move up the ladder, although there are exceptions to this, but for normal purposes, this is how we start. We start with step 1 drugs, move on to step 2, and then step 3. That's why it's called by the ladder. The third is it's given by the clock. By the clock means it is not given on a PRN basis, means SOS basis. When there's pain, you give the drug. No, it has to be given according to the duration of action of drug. For example, paracetamol duration of action is 6 hours. That means it has to be repeated every 6 hours. Irrespective of the pain is there or not there, you have to give it. You look at the clock and give it. If it's morphine, you have to give it every 4 hours. If it is a drug like this thing, naproxen, you give it every 12 hours. So depending on the duration of action. Now, what is the advantage of that? It's because once the duration of action is over, then the breakthrough pain can occur. So you're preventing any breakthrough pain. That is why we are giving it by the clock. That means you're suppressing the pain continuous 24/7. Okay. The fourth important thing is it is individualized to the patient. That means if I give 2 grams of paracetamol to one patient, the second patient may require even 4 grams. So it is not depending upon it is individualized to the patient. The right dose is the one that relieves the pain, whether it is 2 grams or 4 grams, but that dose should relieve the pain. So it is very dependent upon the patient. Some patients have a high threshold of pain, some have a low threshold of pain, some have, severe pain. So depending on that, you have to give it, that's the only criteria. Is the pain relief there? If not, then you have to escalate it. Okay. And also, sometimes there is breakthrough pain, in which case you may have to give an extra dose. All that depends upon the pain the patient is suffering. So it is individualized. Another important thing is you add adjuvant drugs at every step of the ladder, like you have seen the ladder. You can give it at step 1, step 2, or step 3. And why is it given? It is because pain is not necessarily nociceptive. It can be other kinds of pain also in cancer. And secondly, you give this because it can even decrease the undesirable side effects of some analgesics. Then attention to detail. This is also very important. When you see a patient, you have to see the age, what is the weight of the patient. Some patients may be 35 kg, some may be 100 kilos, some may have comorbidities like kidney issues, gastric issues, and also the side effects of the drug should be meticulously monitored. So you have to pay attention to so many details when you're giving the drug. It's not that you prescribe a drug and then forget about it. You have to see so many things to have not only safe administration, but to also prevent the side effects of the drugs. Next, please. So, like I said, it's a very simple tool, easy to apply. It is easily understandable, even by people who are in the periphery, in the underdeveloped countries, whether it is a healthcare worker, not necessarily a nurse who's looking after the patient. It's easily understandable, so it can easily be applied. It's a validated tool. That means it has been proven to be effective. And not only effective, it is also very cost effective. See, most of the drugs are given by mouth, like paracetamol, morphine, all of them are relatively inexpensive drugs. So it is effective and cost effective. And like I said, it can be implemented across the world, even in underdeveloped countries, well suited for home care, because most of the drugs are given orally, and with proper advice, they can take it at home. And it is applicable not only for cancer pain, but also for acute pain. Acute pain means like post-operative pain or pain due to trauma, or any pain which is of short duration, and also for chronic non-cancer pain you can give it, not necessarily cancer. Next, please. But over the years, there have been some modifications of the ladder. Sometimes you may have to omit step 2. Like you start with step 1, but the pain is so severe, you don't have to go to step 2, but you can directly go to step 3. Okay. Another modification is now they've added a 4th step to the ladder. And that I will discuss. That is used to treat crisis of pain, which is not responding even to step 3 drugs. I'll just discuss this in my next slide. Next, please. So this is the step 4. Step 4 are for those 10 to 15% of patients who have intractable pain that is not responding even to step 3, that is opioids. So what are the step 4 modalities? They include various nerve blocks. You can give an ulnar block or a sciatic block or a radial block, depending upon which part is affected and it's not responding. Or you may have to give an epidural block, maybe an infusion, PCA pump has to be put in, or maybe you have to give a neurolytic block with either alcohol or phenol. Like, for example, you may have to give a celiac plexus block or a hypogastric block, or you may have to use a spinal stimulator, or an intrathecal pump. So these are the step 4 modalities, and they may be given only if the patient is not responding to step 3 drugs. Next, please. So let's discuss step 1 drug. Now, these are used, like I said, in mild to moderate pain, and the prototype of the step 1 drug is paracetamol, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and they are combined with an adjuvant drug also. Next, please. So paracetamol, or acetaminophen as it is called in the US, it is acting by inhibiting the central cyclooxygenase enzyme. So it has no effect on peripheral cyclooxygenase, unlike NSAIDs. So it has predominantly antipyretic analgesic action. It has no anti-inflammatory action. So that is one of the drawbacks of paracetamol. Next, please. So what is a dose? You can go up to 4 grams. Like, the single dose should not exceed 1 gram. But normally we can restrict ourselves to 3 grams. So the normal dose that we give is 650 mg Q6H. Okay? But it has a potential for hepatotoxicity, but that occurs only when you go in doses of in patients with liver disease. But you should restrict the doses to 2 to 3. Only if you go beyond that, you can get hepatotoxicity, even in patients with liver disease. It can be given very safely in pediatrics up to a dose of 15 mg per kilogram per 6 hours. Toxicity occurs in doses of more than 90 mg per kg per day. Okay. Now, the NMT of PCM is 650 mg is 5. So NMT is numbers needed to treat. That signifies the efficacy of an analgesic. The lower the NMT, the better the analgesic efficacy is. Means if I treat 5 patients with 650 paracetamol, 1 will get pain relief. That is what it means by NMT of 5. So it is not a very good analgesic, but still it is effective, particularly when you combine it with others. Normally we don't use a rectal route, we always use an oral route, but sometimes when in cancer patients, when the oral route is not feasible, you can even give it rectally. Also IV paracetamol is given. Next, please. So the advantages is, unlike NSAIDs, it has got a very good safety profile, and it has no adverse effect on the gastric mucosa, so well tolerated by patients with acid peptic disease, no adverse renal effects, no effect on platelet function, and even patients who are hypersensitivity reactions, like those who are sensitive to aspirin, can tolerate paracetamol, and these are the important advantages as compared to NSAIDs, which I will discuss later. Next, please. So what are the drawbacks? The main drawback is it has to be given every 6 hours. And it has a potential for hepatotoxicity, but that is when you exceed doses of 3 grams or 4 grams a day. So you should be cautious when you're giving it in liver function dysfunction patients, and also when they are taking alcohol of more than 3 drinks a day. And if the body weight is less than 50 kilograms, then you restrict the total dose to 2 grams or 500 mg QIP. Next, please. So the role of paracetamol in cancer pain, it is a mainstay drug of the WHO analgesic ladder. Basically because of its advantages, safety profile, very good, and it has an opioid sparing effect. That means when you give it along with opioid, you can actually decrease the dose of opioids that you're giving. So it has an opioid sparing effect. So when you add it, it can be added at every step of the ladder. When you add it to step 1 drug like NSAIDs, the NMT improves from 5, it comes to 2. It can be added at step 2 when you're giving tramadol, and also at step 3. So it can be given at every step of the ladder. Next, please. Now, next step 1 drug, which is very important, is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Next, please. So this is a very commonly over-the-counter available drug. It has analgesic as well as anti-inflammatory properties as compared to paracetamol, which doesn't have anti-inflammatory properties. So it is a step 1 drug, primarily used for nociceptive pain, that is pain associated with inflammation, whether it is soft tissue infiltration, whether it's a bony mets, but it can also be given in cancer-related neuropathic pain because inflammation can also cause central sensitization and increase in the neuropathic component of pain. So it can even be given in some cases of neuropathic pain. Next, please. So how does this act? This act by inhibiting the peripheral cyclooxygenase. Okay, and this cyclooxygenase is a very important enzyme in the arachidonic acid cascade, which ultimately produces the tissue tissue inflammatory prostaglandins. So this happens when there is tissue damage, and that causes the arachidonic acid cascade to start. So their prostaglandins are very important intermediaries in pain and inflammation. And how do they mediate pain? It is by peripheral sensitization. So peripheral sensitization is a mechanism by which there are various chemicals like prostaglandins, histamine, and pain-producing substance. They all collect around the nerve endings, and the normal pain that is felt is amplified, and you get a very strong signal to go into the periphery. I mean, going to the central nervous system. That is what is called as peripheral sensitization. And that usually occurs when there's tissue damage and this arachidonic acid pathway is activated. Okay, so this drug is particularly useful in nociceptive pain associated with inflammation because it actually inhibits these prostaglandins, which are intermediaries for inflammation. Next, please. So if you look at this cascade, when there's a tissue injury, there is release of phospholipids and then arachidonic acid is formed. This cyclooxygenase enzyme actually converts this arachidonic acid into prostaglandins, which are responsible for inflammation. So this cyclooxygenase inhibitor will actually inhibit the step between the arachidonic acid and the prostaglandins. But remember, there are two types of cyclooxygenase that exist. One is the COX-2, which is the one that is responsible for causing inflammation. But there is also a COX-1, and COX-1 is actually a beneficial enzyme. This is called a housekeeping or a constitutive enzyme, and that is it subserves the homeostatic functions in the stomach, kidney, maintaining platelet function. So when these NSAIDs are given, not only COX-2 is inhibited, but it will also inhibit COX-1, which means it has undesirable side effects because the housekeeping functions are actually prevented from occurring. So on the one hand, it has a beneficial effect because it is inhibiting COX-2, but on the other hand, it can have adverse effects because of inhibiting COX-1. Next, please. So non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are of two categories. One is, like I said, the non-selective drugs, that is interfering with both COX-1 and COX-2. And then we have the selective COX-2, which is inhibiting only COX-2 and not COX-1. Okay. So let's discuss the non-selective NSAIDs. So the prototypes are ibuprofen, naproxen, aspirin. They act by inhibiting, like I said, COX-1 and COX-2. COX-2 will cause the analgesic effect, right? But COX-1 will have the adverse effects. And what are the adverse effects? They are bleeding because of gastric mucosa function is impaired. You can have hypersensitivity. Renal function is impaired because, and so you can land up with adverse renal effects. And hypersensitivity can manifest as angioedema, urticaria, or bronchospasm. But the inhibition of COX-2 causes a beneficial effect because it is preventing the prostaglandins from forming from arachidonic acid. So it will exert its anti-inflammatory, analgesic, and antipyretic effect. So non-selective NSAIDs is a double-edged sword because it can have both adverse effects because of inhibiting COX-1 and the beneficial effects because of inhibiting COX-2. Next, please. So, like I said, ibuprofen. It is a non-selective NSAIDs. The dose is 400 mg every 6 to 8 hours, maximum of 1 to 2 grams. Its NNT is very low. It is only 2. That means it's an effective analgesic. The other important NSAIDs is naproxen, which we are very commonly using in a dose of 250 to 500 mg every 12 hours per orally or as suppository. Its NNT is also not bad. It is 2.7. Next, please. So, what are the side effects? Like I mentioned, because it is inhibiting COX-1 and the housekeeping functions are inhibited, it can cause cardiovascular effects like risk of hypertension and heart failure. It can cause renal effects with leading to kidney failure, and it can cause gastrointestinal effects leading to bleeding and ulceration, hypersensitivity reactions. It can even cause liver infarction. So what are the risk factors? You have to be very careful whom you give NSAIDs to and how long you give it. Normally when we give NSAIDs, we don't give it for more than 1 or 2 weeks. We have to switch over to paracetamol or tramadol. Because if you give longer, and then these are the categories of patients, those who have upper GI bleed, those who are elderly people, those who are dehydrated, who are on already nephrotoxic drugs, who have a low creatinine clearance, and also people who are at risk of stroke and MI. So you have to be very careful when you use NSAIDs in these kind of patients. Next, please. Now we'll discuss selective COX-2 inhibitor. Like I said, it is selectively inhibiting COX-2 without affecting COX-1. So the beneficial effects are retained of COX-1 action. Only the COX-2 is inhibited. So the prototypes are etoricoxib, also called Nucoxia, which is available in a dose of 60, 90 or 120 mg depending on the body weight. It's a single day dose. The other important COX-2 which acts like a COX-2 inhibitor is diclofenac sodium or Voveron. It can be given orally or IV in a dose of 50 mg every 8 hours to a maximum of 150. Now, the NNT of diclofenac is also very good. It's 2, means it is an effective analgesic. That means 1 in 2 patients who get diclofenac get relief of pain. Okay, next please. Now, NSAIDs can be given topically also, right? We all talked about oral, IV, and intramuscular injections, but this topical NSAIDs is also very effective. And the example, and this actually decreases a risk or less risk of systemic absorption and toxicity. You have various creams available like ibuprofen, diclofenac, piroxicam, ketoprofen. So all these are available as creams. So they can be applied over the painful area with sometimes very good relief. Next, please. So are selective COX-2 inhibitors really as safe as compared to COX-1? That's a question that we need to ask. Okay, now where the GIT is concerned, it is beneficial, right? It is definitely advantageous as compared to the non-selective. But where renal damage is concerned, it is comparable with the non-selective NSAIDs. It also has an extra disadvantage. It's prothrombotic, and there's more likelihood of myocardial and stroke, infarction and stroke in patients taking selective COX-2 inhibitors. In fact, one of the drugs, rofecoxib, which is a selective COX-2 inhibitor, was taken off the US market in 2004 because of these adverse effects. Next, please. And there was this Danish study was published 10 years ago in which they found there was increased cardiovascular morbidity and mortality in the form of MI, stroke, pulmonary hypertension, and sudden cardiac death. And the drugs that were incriminated were rofecoxib, diclofenac sodium. So in such cases who have these comorbidities, it is safer to give brufen or ibuprofen or naproxen. Okay? So that patients who are high-risk cardiac and high-risk neurological. Next, please. So what are the precautions we need to take? We always have to give a gastroprotective drug when you're giving NSAIDs. Be very cautious when you're giving it in acid peptic patients or in smokers or advanced age, those with asthma, those with renal dysfunction. Be very careful. Ensure adequate hydration of the patient. Okay. Then when nephrotoxic drugs are given, you have to be careful. For example, dyes. When you're giving dye, it's very important that we don't, it's a nephrotoxic agent, so we have to be careful. And also, selective COX-2 inhibitors, you are contraindicated in patients with atherosclerotic disease, cerebrovascular disease, or stroke. Next. Now let's discuss step 2. Was I clear about step 1 drugs? Any doubts? Or you want to take the doubts in the end, I think?
Yes, madam, in the end.
Okay. Step 2 drugs. Now, like I said, step 2 is a non-opioid. I mean, basically you're giving, it's like a weak opioid, but you can give it along with a non-opioid and an adjuvant drug, and it is used to treat moderate pain. Next, please. Now, the main advantage of a weak opioid is it's not controlled drug. And so it is more easily available and can be easily prescribed as compared to the controlled drugs like morphine and strong opioids. So you give it for pain, like I said, which is not controlled with step 1, but you don't have to stick to step 2. If the pain is very severe, you can directly go from step 1 to step 3. So the prototypes of step 2 drugs are tramadol and tapentadol. Next, please. These are the drugs that are in common use. So let's discuss tramadol. Now, this is a centrally acting synthetic weak opioid. It has a dual method of action. First of all, it is a mu opioid receptor agonist. That's why it's a weak opioid. And because it's a weak opioid, it has a less tendency for respiratory depression and addiction potential as compared to morphine. The second method of action is it blocks the presynaptic reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine. That means it acts on the descending inhibitory pain pathway. That is how it exerts its effect. Now, its NNT is 3.8. And the combination of tramadol and paracetamol in the form of Ultracet, which is very commonly used in cancer. Next, please. But there are some side effects of tramadol. They include nausea, vomiting, dry mouth, constipation, dizziness, and sometimes even sedation. Next. Now, tramadol has a high oral bioavailability. The oral dose is very potent, is 1/5 as potent as morphine. So how do you give it? 50 to 100 mg every 4 to 6 hours to a maximum dose of 400 mg per day. The intravenous dose is 1/10 as potent as morphine. That means it is less potent as compared to the oral form. So the equi-analgesic dose of tramadol and morphine is 400 mg of tramadol is equivalent to 40 mg of IV tramadol and 80 mg of oral tramadol. You have to divide it by either 10 or 5 depending on whether you're giving IV or oral. Now we have sustained release formulation. That is tramadol SR. That means you have to give it only twice a day. Okay, so that has a longer duration of action. Next, please. Now tapentadol. Tapentadol is another step 2 drug. It's also a weak opioid, structurally related to tramadol. In fact, its mode of action is similar to tramadol. Its also dose is also very similar to tramadol. Okay. So what is the advantage of this over tramadol is it has supposed to have a lesser safety, better safety profile as compared to tramadol. Next, please. Now, codeine is not available. It's a weak opioid. We are not using it. And the other one, next one is, next. Dextropropoxifen used to be available in a combination with acetaminophen as Proxivon, but it has been suspended because of some prolonged QT interval problem. So now I think there's a move to try to revoke its suspension because it is a very useful drug, particularly in cancer. Next, please. So what are the combinations we need to give? When you prescribe a drug, a WHO stepladder drug, there are certain things that we have to do. Never use 2 drugs of the same category. Okay. Sometimes we do use step 1 drugs, both paracetamol and NSAIDs. But step 2 drugs, you'd never combine tramadol and tapentadol, or you don't combine tramadol with an opioid. Okay, these are the combinations you should avoid. But the combinations that are favorable, which can potentiate each other's action, are paracetamol NSAIDs with morphine, or paracetamol with NSAIDs, or paracetamol with tramadol. So these are the favorable drugs. Why say favorable? because it will be more effective with less side effects. Okay, so these are the combinations that you have to go by. So these are the few thumb rules that you can remember when you're prescribing a drug from the WHO. Next, please. Now let's discuss adjuvant drugs. I mentioned adjuvant drugs are used at every step of the ladder. Now, why adjuvant drugs? Now, cancer pain is not necessarily nociceptive. That means it is not something that will respond to either paracetamol or NSAIDs or tramadol or morphine. It can have other components. It can have associated muscle spasm. You can have symptoms like nausea, vomiting, so many other weakness, so many other symptoms, or maybe lack of sleep. Then you have a neuropathic component. You could have bone pain. You can have bowel obstruction. So nociceptive pain can be combined with various other types of pain. And to treat those kinds of pain, you add an adjuvant drug. So adjuvant drugs, the primary indication is not for pain. Like most of the adjuvant drugs, if you see steroid, it is not for pain. Or if you see an anticonvulsant drug, its primary indication not pain, but it has analgesic properties. So they are called co-analgesics because they are co-administered with other analgesics of the WHO ladder. Next, please. So they can be broadly classified as multi-purpose drugs, which can treat pain and also other coexisting symptoms, or they can be specific type of drugs. For example, a specific type of pain is neuropathic pain or bone pain or musculoskeletal pain or pain due to bowel obstruction. Whereas the general things are, they can be feeling depressed, they can have other problems like lack of sleep, or they may have muscle spasm. So you add the multi-purpose drugs. Okay. Next, please. So what are the adjuvant drugs that are used for neuropathic pain? Now, neuropathic pain can occur in 40% of patients with cancer. And what is the definition of neuropathic pain according to the IASP 2018 is pain caused by a disease or lesion in the somatosensory nervous system. And how do you know it's a neuropathic pain? Because the pain will have a dysesthetic quality. That means they will complain of burning, shooting, electric current, or they can have pain on touch. Okay, so that means a neuropathic component is present. Okay, next please. So why does it occur? It occurs because of direct invasion or compression of a nerve, which can be one nerve or the plexus of nerves, or it could be because of the treatment of cancer, whether it is chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or surgery. All of that can cause peripheral neuropathy, radiation-induced neuropathy, or surgery means secondary to nerve injury. So all these can cause neuropathic pain. So it can either be because of the cancer per se or because of the treatment of cancer. The various treatment modalities can itself cause neuropathic pain. Next, please. So, Rajalakshmi, how much time I have?
Around 10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. Okay, then I can complete. So what are the drugs used in neuropathic pain? See, earlier the thinking was that step 3 drugs are not very effective for neuropathic pain. So they always thought that morphine and all are not good and we have to add the adjuvant drug. But subsequently, some studies have been done in 2005 and 2007, which showed that strong opioids like morphine and methadone are effective for even malignant neuropathic pain. And transdermal fentanyl also can be effective. So along with, so now we have included even this in neuropathic pain. Okay. So besides that, we can use weak opioids like tramadol and tapentadol are very effective also in neuropathic pain. And adjuvant drugs are the mainstay of neuropathic pain, which I will now discuss. So what are the adjuvant drugs that we are using? The main adjuvant drugs we use in neuropathic pain are the anticonvulsants and the antidepressants. But other less commonly used drugs are local anesthetics, NMDA antagonists, corticosteroids, and GABA agonists. So in neuropathy also we have a pain ladder. In step 1, you use either an antidepressant or an antiepileptic. In step 2, you combine antidepressant and an antiepileptic. In step 3, you go to an NMDA antagonist, like what is ketamine comes under NMDA. And in step 4, you go to IV lignocaine. So next, please. So anticonvulsants and antidepressants are the first line drug for neuropathic pain. So why are anticonvulsants useful in neuropathic pain? Because there's a shared pathophysiology between epilepsy and pain. In both, there is neuronal hyperexcitability, and these anticonvulsants actually dampen the neuronal hyperexcitability. And the commonly used drugs are gabapentin and pregabalin. Next, please. So you know how they act in neuropathic pain is they bind to the voltage gated. Just 1 minute. So they bind to the voltage gated calcium channels on the presynaptic neuron, and it will prevent the entry of calcium into the influx into the presynaptic neuron. So when the calcium is not there, there'll be less release of the excitatory neurotransmitter released. And when that is less, then the postsynaptic neuron is not excited. So that is how it is preventing the transmission of the nerve impulse. Yeah. Next, please. So if you look at gabapentin and pregabalin, the advantages are it's well tolerated and it is having a proven analgesic effect for neuropathic pain. But the side effects are they may feel excessively sleepy or dizzy or ataxic or fatigue or weight gain. So these are some of the side effects that you have to explain to the patient when you're starting these drugs. Next, please. So gabapentin and pregabalin, the main advantage of gabapentin is it is less expensive. Okay, but the advantage of pregabalin is that its oral bioavailability is more predictable. That means you can, in a few steps, you can go to the effective dose. Titration is very easy. Okay, but of course it is more expensive. Next, please. The other anticonvulsants are sodium valproate is also one commonly used drug. And these are the others, but we don't use it that often for cancer. Next, please. Antidepressants. I said this is also first-line drug for treatment of neuropathic pain. It takes around a week for its action to start. Okay, but it has got antidepressant properties, but the analgesic effects can occur earlier and at much lower dosage levels as compared to the antidepressant effect. So it is so very particularly patients with cancer who are having depression, anxiety, insomnia, it is a very valuable drug to give in these patients. How does it act? It acts by inhibiting the reuptake of norepinephrine and serotonin. And so it is acting at the descending inhibitory pain pathway. It is activating the descending inhibition of pain. Next, please. You know the pain pathway, no? One is the ascending pathway, right, by which the impulse is transmitted to the brain. From the brain, there is also descending inhibition coming. Okay, so sometimes that inhibition can be activated by these drugs, like the ones that are preventing the reuptake of norepinephrine and serotonin. So antidepressants are of 3 types. Just remember that. One is tricyclic antidepressants or TCA. One is selective serotonin. It inhibits only serotonin, that's called SSRI. And one which inhibits both serotonin and norepinephrine, which is called SNRI. So TCA, that is the tricyclic antidepressants. Again, 2 types, tertiary, secondary. Tertiary, we commonly use amitriptyline. Secondary, we commonly use nortriptyline. Okay, both classes have analgesic properties. Next, please. But only thing is, the tertiary amines like amitriptyline may be more effective analgesics, but they have more higher side effects as compared to the nortriptyline. So supposing there's a patient who is at risk of getting side effects, then you go for nortriptyline as compared to amitriptyline. Next, please. The side effects, again, remember, CNS effects, somnolence, drowsiness. Just 1 minute, please. Just 1 second. Just 1 second. The anticholinergic effects you should remember, because they are the ones that cause dry mouth, glaucoma, blurred vision, cardiotoxicity. So these things you should just remember when you are giving the TCs. Next, please. What are the contraindications? Those with glaucoma, those with prostatic problems, those with cardiac conduction defects, you avoid TC. Next, please. So SNRI, the commonly used SNRI is duloxetine, and the other SSRI that's commonly used are paroxetine and citalopram, acetylopram. So if you look at the analgesic effect, TCS are definitely more analgesic than SNRI as compared to SSRI. But if you look at the side effect profile, TCS are more side effect as compared to SNRI and SSRI. The most commonly used, like I said, these are the ones that are common. If you look at the dose administration, that you start with amitriptyline a dose of 10 mg at night, and then you gradually scale it up to 25. The same for nortriptyline. Whereas gabapentin, you start off with 100 mg, or depending on the age and the body weight, or 300 mg at night, and then you can escalate it up to even 1200 mg T days. Pregabalin, you start at 75 mg, and then you can go up higher, maybe twice a day, or maybe double the dose, and the other drugs. So all these doses should be adjusted in medically ill patients and patients with renal dysfunction. Next, please. So what are the other drugs in neuropathic pain? NMDA blockers. I said that is the step 3 of the neuropathic pain ladder, and their main prototype is ketamine. Okay, but magnesium and calcium infusions can also be used as an NMDA blocker. Next, please. So ketamine normally is an anesthetic, but for analgesic effect, we give it at sub-anesthetic doses. For example, if you're giving oral ketamine, you give in a dose of 10 to 20. Just 1 minute, I'll just take this phone call, please. This one. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Then it can also be given as subcutaneous or IV ketamine in a dose of maximum 50 to 100 mg per day. Okay. Then there's another mode of giving ketamine is a burst ketamine therapy. That means a burst or a pulse course of ketamine is given for a maximum of 5 days, starting with 100 mg in 24 hours, going up to 300 and then 500 mg. If the 100 is not effective, you can go up to 300 and then 500 mg. So these are the various ways in which you can give ketamine for the treatment of neuropathic pain that is not responding to the step 1 and step 2 drugs. Next, please. But there are certain side effects of ketamine. They include dysphoria, hallucinations. So these are the psychotomimetic effects, and they can be prevented by giving haloperidol or benzodiazepine. Next, please. Local anesthetics can also be given in patients that are not responding, the neuropathic pain that is not responding to the routine treatment of neuropathic pain. That is the crescendo kind of neuropathic pain. Okay, so how do you give local anesthetics? Next, please. It's given as an infusion. Xylocard is available, and you give 5 mg per kg over 1 hour as an infusion. Okay. And if that is effective, then you can transfer, you can change over to oral mexiletine. Next, please. Topical neuroanalgesics can also be given. They are lignocaine and capsaicin. So they can be given topically, especially when there's a lot of the allodynia component, pain on touch and very painful touch. Then you can apply these particular neuroanalgesics. Next, please. So lignocaine patch, topical lignocaine. It's available as a 5% patch. It's now available in India as Lidovelar patch. And you know how it acts is that you have to apply about, up to 3 patches you can apply over the painful area. But you must keep it for 12 hours and then remove it after 12 hours. So 12 hours on and 12 hours off. And this can really decrease the pain of some, particularly post-herpetic neuralgia and chemotherapy-induced cancer neuropathic pain. It is very effective. Next, please. Steroid is a multi-purpose analgesic. So it can be used for a wide variety of pain associated with cancer, like neuropathic pain, bone pain, headache because of tumors in the brain, bone mets, or pain due to hollow viscous organ distension, or metastasis in the spine. So it's that way very useful drug to be given as an adjuvant in cancer. Next, please. But it has got side effects which you're all familiar with. Next, please. So dexamethasone is a first line drug. It has a long duration of action. Its half-life is 36 to 54 hours. So you need to give it only once. The second advantage is it has got less mineralocorticoid effect. So less degree of water and sodium retention. Next, please. So this is a dose that you can look up later on because I think I'm running out of time. It will be available in my presentation. Again, this also, I will skip the slide. Now, GABA agonists. Now, baclofen or lioresal is one of the analog of an inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA. So it is given in neuropathic pain when there's associated spasticity. You start off with 10 mg and you can gradually go up to 300 to 230 to 200 mg per day. Next, please. That's one of the another adjuvant drug. Then there are adjuvants given for bone pain. Now, skeletal metastasis from breast, lungs, prostate, and all can be very painful. They are called skeletal-related events or SRE. So they can really affect the quality of life of patients. And they may not respond so much to WHO ladder. So you may have to give some of the drugs that ameliorate bone pain. Next, please. So what are these? You can start off with corticosteroids and NSAIDs, but you can give calcitonin, subcutaneous or intranasal in a dose of 200 units per day for 14 days. You can give bisphosphonates, denosumab, or palliative radiation. That is also an option to treat bone pain. Next, please. So bisphosphonates acts by inhibiting the osteoclastic effect. So bone resorption is reduced and it stimulates osteoblastic effect. Next, please. The one that is useful are zoledronic acid, and this can be given particularly for cancer pain, metastatic bone pain related to breast and prostate and multiple myeloma. But it has got one very bad side effect. It's called osteonecrosis of the jaw. So that you have to watch out for when you're giving bisphosphonates. Next, please. Denosumab. This is also given for bone mets, but not for solid tumor. For solid tumors except prostate metastasis. Okay. Now it's supposed to be superior to zoledronic acid, but it is more expensive. Next, please. Then you can, if that also not, you can even go for radiation of the bone. You use strontium and samarium, and they selectively deliver radiation to bone metastasis, particularly for refractive multifocal bone pain, like prostate cancer. Next, please. Just 1 minute. Then there's pain due to bowel obstruction. For this, there are various options available. One is steroids, they decrease edema in the bowel. Then you can give octreotide or anticholinergic drugs, or you can give a combination of all, dexamethasone with octreotide with hyoscine. And they can be very effective in preventing the symptoms due to bowel obstruction, which can be very, very discomforting for the patient. Next, please. Next, sir. The other adjuvant drugs that we give are muscle relaxants, neuroleptic drugs like olanzapine when there's delirium and agitation, or antibiotics sometimes, sedatives, anxiolytics, laxatives, etc. These are all adjuvant drugs that can be given. Next, please. So, in summary, WHO analgesic ladder is a sheet anchor of cancer pain management, but we can also use it for non-cancer pain. Like I said, it can be given everywhere, all over the world, and it has legitimized the use of opioids in cancer and non-cancer pain. Thank you very much. And sorry for the interruptions in between.
Thank you, madam. So it was a lot of information. So we can have a few questions. So anybody?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, yes.
Good evening, ma'am, Mary, ma'am, Dr. Neelima.
Hi, nice to see you again.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, ma'am. It's an excellent class. Thank you so much. I just have one question, ma'am. When you have a patient with cancer who gets admitted in hospital with acute pain, say he's in hospital with acute pain, at that time also do you give oral medicines or can you give IV? If you're giving opioids, can you give IV opioids?
It depends upon what kind of acute pain you're talking about.
No, like acute pain related to the cancer, not to something else, related to cancer.
You can give paracetamol IV. Or you
And that's what I asked, ma'am. Do you have to give like orally or can you give IV at that time?
in the hospital, you can
Even
easily give. Many of these drugs can be given, even morphine can be given IV. All the
Yes, ma'am.
drugs can be
Yes,
given
ma'am.
IV.
They can all
Yeah,
be given
because
IV.
that will at least start off the pain relief and then you can switch over to oral.
You can switch over to that. Okay, ma'am.
All the
Ma'am,
drugs can be given,
IV.
except for Brufen maybe. That's the only one
Okay.
that cannot be given.
So when in hospital, you can give it IV. And then when he goes home, then you can convert it to an oral
Exactly.
medicine.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, and the haloperidol also, you give the haloperidol, which you said was for the side effects. Is that given IV or orally?
If the patient is in the hospital, you can
No,
give
at
it
home.
IV. At home, you can give orally.
Orally also. Okay. Ma'am, one more thing. You have these buprenorphine patches, no, which I see people use for
Bovelor patches.
Yeah, buprenorphine. How effective is that for? Is it more for acute pain or is it for cancer pain?
I think it would be more effective for non-cancer pain, which is severe. I've used it in severe non-cancer pain, but I've not seen it being used so much in cancer pain. But some severe types of non-cancer pain, I've used Buvelor patches and it has been quite effective.
Quite effective. Okay, ma'am.
You have to monitor for sometimes vomiting and little bit of drowsiness and slurring of speech. So that you have to monitor. You can start off with a low dose and then go on to the higher dose. But I think it will be more, I don't see it much being used in cancer patients.
Okay.
But it is maybe easier to prescribe as compared to morphine maybe.
Morphine. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
So there was another question. How will you assess the pain if the patient is poorly educated with a numerical pain scale?
Oh, there are other pain scales also. You know, see this NRS is something which even educated people sometimes may not be able to tell exactly what is the score. But you can look at the face of the patient, the body, basically the communication. You know how you just look at where you can even show there's a FACES scale which is normally used in children, but you can use it even in the people are not so educated. But by just looking at the patient, you can also the groaning, the moaning, the body habitus, how they are positioning themselves, all that also can give an indicator of the kind of pain. That is the non-verbal cues you must take to assess in those who cannot point out to the numerical rating score. Okay. So these kind of scales are useful. By just looking at the face or by listening to the sounds of the patient, you can gauge the patient's pain.
Okay, thank you, madam. So if you have more questions, please put it in the chat box, and we will go to the patient story, which will be presented by Dr. Uma. So, Dr. Uma.
Dr. Sunil, I'm ready.
Doctor, you can start with your presentation.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm also an anesthetist. I'm Dr. Uma Pradeepa. I work in Apollo Hospital as an associate consultant in pain and anesthesia. So today I'm presenting a case of a 59-year-old female, the provisional diagnosis being left breast cancer with suspected recurrence and vertebral metastasis. The presenting complaints were she had pain in the left breast region and left hand area since 2 months, pain in the back region since 2 months. She is a 59-year-old female with left breast mass, which was investigated and it was found to be cancer 1 year back. For that, she underwent modified radical mastectomy 8 months back. She presently complains of pain in the left breast region along the surgical site also, and also along the left hand, which started 2 months back and progressively increasing since then. The intensity of pain is moderately severe, numerical NRS being around 6 to 7, and is felt all along the breast area and is associated with dragging type of pain in her left hand. She also complains of pain in her back since 1 month, apparently increasing on sitting and standing and decreasing when she is lying down. She says her pain is going down her right leg and is severe with standing and doing work. She has no symptoms of weakness or problems in walking. Next, please. One point I want to add, in the past history, she is not a diabetic or a hypertensive. She is not a diabetic or a hypertensive or any other comorbidities. Next. On general physical examination, she appeared to be pale, malnourished, and on the left hand, where she was complaining of pain, there was a lymphedema present. Her bowel and bladder habits are normal, but her sleep is disturbed due to constant pain. In her left breast region, there is erythema and diffuse tenderness along the surgical incision. There are no other visible lumps or venous engorgement, which was noted. There is diffuse swelling of the left hand, but there is no tenderness noted there, so probably it could be lymphedema. Next. On examining her back, there was no visible swellings or deformities. On palpation, there is tenderness in the midline over the L1, L2 vertebral region. On neurological examination, no motor or sensory deficits were seen in the lower limbs. There was a positive SLR test, which suggests probable nerve root compression on the right side. Other systemic examination was found to be normal. Next, please. So she was sent up for a complete blood picture, liver function test, serum electrolytes, renal function test, and a PET scan. An MRI of the lumbar spine was suggested. Chemo and radiation, she was already taking chemotherapy and radiation. For pain, she was on tablet Ultracet twice a day. Ultracet is combination of Tremdor and paracetamol. Next, please. Coming to the psychosocial aspects, her socioeconomic status, she comes from a lower middle class family. She's a 59-year-old lady who is a widow, and she lives with her daughter, her son, and daughter-in-law and grandkids. Her son works in a private company as a peon. Her daughter is 25 years old. She works in a nearby beauty parlor and is not married yet. She used to work as a cook, and now she quit her job since her breast cancer diagnosis was given since 1 year. She is looked after by her family, but is worried that all her family's savings are being spent on her. She is worried about her daughter's marriage, her grandchildren, and their future. She is in constant pain, and her recent onset back pain is making her unable to walk around and do her basic chores. Her worry is about being dependent on her family and not to be able to help them financially. She's also anxious about recurrence of the cancer, and there can be a chance of spread. Next. The medications she is on, she's already on, she had a few chemotherapy and radiation sessions. So further continuation will be depending on the PET scan report. And for pain, she was put on Tramadol and paracetamol, which was now escalated to thrice a day. She was taking twice a day. Now it is escalated to thrice a day. An adjuvant for the neuropathic pain, gabapentin, was added 300 milligrams twice a day. And high protein diet and nutritional supplements were added. Next. So the main concerns for this case from our side would be her pain, chances of recurrence of cancer and metastasis, which could be ruled out with PET scan and MRI, probable vertebral metastasis and fracture in her vertebra. She's psychologically depressed and worried about the finances of further treatment. Next. So in summary, a 59-year-old female with left breast cancer, post-MRM and post-chemo radiation status with moderate to severe pain in the left breast, left hand and back due to probable metastasis to vertebra. Next. So the discussion points, does this patient require palliative care? What are the problems faced by this patient and her family? What can be done for her pain? And what can be done for her family to support her? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uma. So, I would like to ask participants to come up with the comments for this discussion point. So, any of you can anybody has any suggestions or comments? Okay, Dr. Geediga says she can be helped with exercises and bandaging specific to lymphedema. Dr. Amar, is there lymphedema?
Yes, Dr. Sunil, there was lymphedema, probably because of her surgery and she had radiation also. So there could have been a lymphatic blockage, so there would have been lymphedema. So she had lymphedema, but it was non-tender.
So there was another question. What could be the reason for erythema in the operated breast region?
So probably it could, she should be investigated further. Probably there could be a recurrence in the same breast. There could be a recurrence of the cancer, but there were no visible lumps on palpation. But a PET scan would clear the picture for us. Yeah,
Okay.
NSAIDs can be added. I think Dr. Ramakrishnan has pointed out NSAIDs should have been added.
Okay. First question: does this patient require palliative care? Anybody? Yes. So can you explain why this patient requires palliative care? Any of you, please unmute yourself and speak.
She has multiple problems, not just
Yeah.
her illness, but also the socioeconomic status, the socioeconomic issues facing her, financially not so well off, the feelings of a feeling of worry that she's not able to contribute to her treatment, draining the finances, pain, all that is there. So and so she'll need some counseling also. I mean, some emotional, some support. So that's why I think she needs palliative care. Apart from her treatment, the other aspects also will have to be, she'll need support and care for that.
Okay. So Dr. Savitri says the patient is going through a possibly life-threatening illness with significant effect on her psychology and finances, thus needs palliative care. From Dr. Subra says bisphosphonates can be added if there is skeletal metastasis. Yeah.
I think, Dr. Sunil, in aspect of this patient, it is in India we lack the view of a complete holistic approach for a cancer patient or treatment, because an oncologist treats, an oncosurgeon treats, a pain physician treats, but there is no proper holistic approach. And for that purpose, I think she needs a palliative care, because a palliative care physician can think about an all-round treatment of the patient, including psychosocial aspects, including pain, including other problems she has. So I think in that context, palliative care would definitely help her.
Yeah. Okay. So there are many comments. I am sure all of you will know why this patient requires palliative care. What are the problems faced by this patient and her family? So all the problems faced by the patient will also affect the family, isn't it? We should address to the body image perception too. Yeah, that's a very good point. So as a woman, losing a breast will be something which will make the patient aware of the body image, and that will also affect sexuality. So that's very important. Yeah, recurrence is another problem. If this patient has recurrence, that is going to be a psychological trauma for the patient and family. And again, the economical problem. They have financial restraints, so it will also be a problem. So if the patient is facing any problems, those problems are not only faced by the patient but also by the family. Okay, so there are two more comments. does the practice of palliative medicine need a position to positively affect the psychosocial and financial condition of patients? For example, Pallium has programs for education of children in disease-ridden families. Okay. So, uh, so we know that palliative care is not only looking at physical problems, but also the other problems, psychological, social, financial, and spiritual. But every palliative care unit will not be able to cater to the needs, all these needs of the patient. So what we can do is do as much as possible. We will not be able to do, even Pallium India will not be able to do all the things for all the patients. So we will do whatever possible, and we will also facilitate uh, if somebody needs financial support, we may take support from somebody. So that's what you can do. So educational support is also like that. We usually find out people who can sponsor children. So palliative radiotherapy, yes, if the patient has bone metastasis, palliative radiotherapy is an option. But we have to first find out and take the opinion from radiation oncologist. Okay, so this patient has pain in the back as well as pain on the arm. So what is the type of pain this patient is experiencing? Dr. Rama, can you give more details about the pain on the back and arm?
Yes, Dr. Sunil. The pain in the leg is a radiating type of pain. The pain is going down the leg and it is radiating from the back. But there is no tenderness on palpation of the leg. And as I told, on examination with the leg raising of the right leg, there is similar pain. So I was suspecting it to be a neurological type of pain because there could be a metastasis or a bone fracture which is compressing the nerve roots. So this is, I think, a type of neuropathic pain.
Okay, so pain at the back may be nociceptive, and the radiating pain is possibly a neuropathic also. So we
Yes.
have to give medication as per the description of the pain to treat both nociceptive as well as neuropathic pain. She is on tab ultraset TID, isn't it?
Yes, doctor.
So with that, she has good pain relief, or she still in pain?
From twice a day, we have put her on thrice a day.
Mm.
She has better pain relief, but I don't think so she was fully satisfied with the pain relief. So we were thinking in terms of gabapentin was also added
Yeah.
to her treatment. But I think we should have added NSAIDs, but we were waiting for the renal function test to come because she was quite dehydrated and we didn't want to give NSAIDs until unless we see her creatinine.
Okay. So one thing you have to understand is that even though we discussed adjoint analgesics for treating neuropathic pain, that doesn't mean that opioids will not do any good for the patient. Actually, are opioids can be used to treat neuropathic pain, and opioids are partially sensitive to neuropathic pain. So you can also use even stronger opioids because she is already on ultraset. That means tramadol 37.5 TID. So you can directly go to morphine if you want, and maybe a short course of NSAID will also help. But the dose of gabapentin recommended for treating neuropathic pain is in the range of 1200 milligram to 3600 milligram.
I agree. I agree. Yeah, we would have definitely, depending on the response, we would have increased the dose. And I definitely think morphine should have been added. It would
Yeah.
have been advantageous. Do you prefer morphine or a fentanyl patch in this case?
No, I will go for. We usually go for a immediate release morphine
Okay.
because we don't. When you place a patch like fentanyl,
Yes.
suppose it is 12.5 or 25 microgram. That means 25 microgram of fentanyl is released every hour. We will
Every
not
hour.
be able to alter the strength of the fentanyl in
Okay.
when you apply fentanyl patch. So first of all, we have to find out how much opioids does she need.
Okay.
So for that, we have to use short-acting opioids like morphine.
Okay.
And when the pain is stabilized, that means if the patient is not taking many SOS doses, that means then you can convert this morphine into fentanyl patch if you want. But the problem with fentanyl patch is that it is costly.
True.
12.5 microgram patch will cost about 250 to 400 rupees.
True.
And if you look at the potency or equivalent strength of patch that is required, 60 milligram of morphine is equivalent to 25 microgram of fentanyl patch. So 25 microgram fentanyl patch, it will cost about 300 to 500 rupees. So for 3 days, you have to spend 300 to 500 rupees. But if you give morphine for 3 days, that will cost only about 20 rupees. So that's the comparison between fentanyl patch and morphine. So for a patient who is already having financial problems,
Constraints. Yeah.
then yeah, morphine will be a good choice.
Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Morphine patch is not available. Morphine tablets and capsules and injections are available. So what can be done for the family? What can be done for the family supporting her? Any thoughts on this? So she has a daughter and
Yeah, she
that,
has a daughter who's not married. She has a son and
okay,
daughter-in-law and grandkids.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Son is working in a private firm, isn't it?
Yes, yes, he is peon in a private company. Yeah, she was one of the source of income. She was working, but she quit after the breast cancer diagnosis.
Mhm. So anybody has any ideas what can be done for the family?
Sir, I've written in the chat box, like
Okay.
if there is an organization like this which would probably aid in a situation like this, we can put across and become a channel for the family. Even a counselor, if can be arranged for those people, it would be good if they have sessions regularly for that, so that would at least cover up some of the emotional burden which the family is going through. Plus the financial aid, if it is possible through any organization or an NGO, could be helped. And that's my opinion, sir.
Okay, thank you.
If it is possible at all.
Yeah. Yes. Those are valid points. I would also like to tell you that first of all, we have to talk to the family and find out what are their concerns. So,
Yes, sir.
from
Depending on the concern.
yeah, from our point of view, we may see some concerns, but that may not be the true concern of the family or the patient. So we have to talk to them, listen to them, find out what are their concerns, and then we have to address those concerns. That's what we have
Yes,
to do.
sir.
Yeah.
Yes. So the counselor, that's why I said if the counselor is there, the counselor prepares the dossier for us to bridge between the family and the NGO or the organization which probably would be able to help,
Yeah.
depending on the dossier, what the requirement is.
Yeah. 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 That's true.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So, so
Dr.
are there?
Sunil, I
Yeah.
just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
Is there a concept of support groups in India anywhere you're aware of, like patients with breast cancer or patients with unique cancers? Do they have some
Yeah.
support groups, or
Yeah.
because they can?
I have heard about a support group. Some institutions are having support groups. For example, we have a bereavement support group, but we don't have cancer support group. but we have a paraplegic support group. That's also happening in many institutions.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think we have to wind up the session. We are running out of time. First of all, I would like to thank Dr. Mary Abraham for being our faculty today. And thank you, Dr. Uma, for presenting this excellent patient story. And thank you all for your interactive interactions. And please give the feedback. The link is shared in the chat. And thank you all. And we will see you on next Monday.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And in the meantime, we will be sending the PowerPoint, learning materials, and video link.